The Queen's Jewish Link presents the Jewish Living Podcast, the show that examines the many facets of Orthodox Jewish life. Here's your host, Izzo Zwirin.
Last week on the Jewish Living Podcast, we spoke with Shimi Feintuch, an addiction counselor working primarily with the Orthodox community. This week, we take it one step further.
My name is Moishe Chanin, and I am a certified life coach and a recovery coach, addiction recovery coach.
Moishe has a very important story to tell, one that shows that addiction doesn't only happen to so-called children at risk or someone you may think is ripe for a substance issue. No. Moishe, for all intents and purposes, was a regular Orthodox Jew from a well-known Frum community with no glaring issues growing up that would cause someone to bat an eye until it was too late. It's a story that's important for teens, parents, educators, and really anyone who's interested in aiding in this hidden affliction in the Frum community. So tell me a little bit about your more.
And I knew New York. Yeah.
So
it's not such a big beat. We're getting dark, and it was, as we call it, brew, right? We would take, which I guess I was to certain. I guess I'll just jump buffalo. So there was something about that out of this one, and I believed it. That I would.
Hours or days.
I think my self-respect, the thing on earth that can make me feel better. It's just crazy to me that.
And you were right.
So that I can figure out.
Right.
I did not. I feel okay sharing my story. So much more dramatic. And these people are embracing the whole program of recovery.
Family at this time, you might not know that there's a problem there.
It's important to know the pain that they're in. Counselors and
Didn't know
those type of people in camps, being with other addicts who have experienced medicine for instance and shame and guilt about it. What can we do to make sure that we don't relapse? Go back because it was so beneficial, but individual therapy, and they also produce cigarettes. Yeah.
So
locked up. I had to. What did you lively help of Hashem and help of asking me for help, and I'll be telling them some tables. I'll do something. Those are usually the four things. But I hit it off and
ability, your experience
with other people in recovery, looking into it, and very quickly I just found it. I really feel like that's what I'm. It's in our community, and this is as we started coming up with the idea.
Wow.
So along with the neshamas, but that's the environment at home. But I think once I talk, is living with the person with mental illness like this, taking away the stigma. And I sound so off things. From Parkway, I was there for a couple of manipulate and that type of thing. Lubavitch Yeshiva on Crown Street, making them do it. So knowing that it's on Ocean Parkway, then I went to the one in Crown Heights, and then I realized, oh my gosh, people who were successful
really helped to further,
for the most part, communicative, but went out of town and basically didn't foundation went to different yeshivas.
So the reason that we have you on here today is we want to continue our discussion on addiction. So last week we had on Shimi Feintuch, who is a substance abuse counselor. We're having a little bit of a different time here today because we're not talking to somebody that exclusively works in the field, but might have a little bit of a different point of view on it. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your history with addiction.
So I think it would be wise for me to first say my experience of addiction before I understood what it was. Because I can explain to you now what addiction is, and I'll keep using psychological terms and all these different things that I learned in the mental health field. My history with addiction, as far as I can remember, it really began with how I felt, which gave me the need to drink or use. And when I say use, by the way, anytime I say use, I mean using any substance, drugs, any type of drugs. if I were to just say the story of my addiction from when I started drinking or using, that would be incomplete of the story of an addict. And the reason why I know that now is because I've had so many conversations with addicts, and we all have that same common thing of our stories are different, but we experienced certain emotions at certain times. And those were the things that made us feel like we needed something else.
Right.
And the feeling I had, an overwhelming feeling I had that I remember, is a feeling of always having a need to do something to be with everybody else. I felt naturally less than, different, part of everybody else. From my family, from my class, even there were some times where I felt part of, and I'll get into that soon, but let's say being in a family with a huge family, everybody seems to have it figured out, but for some reason I don't. There were some things that I think reinforced that without getting into too many details, but it was basically being called names at home, at school, and these names were very much internalized. And that could have been an outside force that made me feel this way. But it feels like it was something that was kind of there. It was just there. I can't pinpoint to tell you what made me feel that way. But I know for a fact that I felt like I was less than everybody else. And I had to do certain things, whatever it may be. And I had to, whatever price it may cost, I had to do it in order to be part of everybody else. The feeling of loneliness and less than and not being a part of was so tremendous. So it would be worth it for me to risk things like breaking Shabbos, stealing, lying, doing things against my own boundaries, doing things against my parents' boundaries, doing things against society, doing, going against other rules in order to feel okay. The need to feel okay and being part of everybody else was so tremendous. Now, a lot of people ask me, like, or like I actually hear like family of addicts, like, why doesn't he just stop? He sees that he's like, I'm going to leave him. Why doesn't he just stop? Right. So something that I think it's important for people to know is that it's a medication. And yes, back in the day, I didn't realize that that's what was happening, but I knew there was a pain, an underlying pain of loneliness and isolation in my thoughts. Practically speaking, I was part of a class. I was part of these cliques. I had friends. I was part of an awesome family. I'm part of, camp and all these different things, right? But I still feel like I'm alone, and I need to do certain things in order to feel part of it.
What people might be listening to you and thinking, especially if they have someone in their life that might have gone through something like this, is you're saying things along the lines of, I was part of a good family. I had a nice group of friends. It was never that I felt unwanted, or not never, but it was, for the most part, I didn't feel unwanted. For the most part, I felt like I had a community or a group of people or a family, and that wasn't the driving force behind. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect because
That's
you're
incorrect.
using the word feel, right?
Okay.
I had those. The fact is that those things were present for me. The fact is I had parents and family that loved me. And fact is I was part of, but I didn't feel those feelings. I did not internalize the external factors. I
Okay.
still felt inside that it was missing.
The reason that I'm asking this is because somebody might think on the outside, whatever's going through with my loved one is my fault. I could have done something different. Do you think that, before we get into the actual what happened, do you think that things could have been different?
100%. But whenever I go to that subject, I have to be safe, right? And what I
Yes.
mean by that is if I go into that down that road of finding who caused it, it doesn't give me any peace or healing. And it doesn't solve anything for me. And if somebody's going to start taking responsibility for me and is going to say, oh, I could have done something different, that's not going to make any healing or peace for them either. So I see no purpose in that. I can talk about it, but like I said, I don't really see anything productive in that. So,
Okay.
and I don't even know for sure either. I know many people, I have so many people that I know that didn't have those external factors. They didn't have those challenges that I had, and they also had the same feeling. That's what I was saying. Like, we have so many different stories, but we still went through those same emotions. And the
So,
emotions is feeling alone, that loneliness, feeling inferior.
right, and it's not necessarily something that you can pinpoint as to the cause, nor might it even be worthwhile to look for the cause.
If I was doing research and I wanted to teach parents how to bring up their kids, or teach teachers how to, then I would go down to this route, which actually a beautiful path has already been paved by Shimon Russell, where he has these 4 concepts which help people build resilience, so that when people go through things in life, parents can build within them this concept of resilience so that they can bounce back, or they'll have an environment where they encourage sharing and opening up. We'll get to that. That's definitely a subject I love to talk about. I'm very
All right,
passionate about.
great. Let's go to the start of it all. You've been open. There's a video on YouTube that people can watch, and we'll give them the direct area where they can find it later. But you're very open with your substance addictions. Can you share us where it all began?
I think the first behavior that really filled that gap, that hole, was through stealing, from pushkas, from my parents' pockets, from their pocketbooks, from not giving back change after I'd buy something. Any time that I could get access to cash, I would. It was an opportunity for me to steal. And why would I steal? I would steal because I'd take the money and use it to feel part of. So at certain points, it meant chipping in, because all of my siblings were chipping in to buy a computer, or it was a laser printer. I don't remember what it was. This is back in like the early 90s, right? And everybody was chipping in to buy this really cool thing. And I'm a 7-year-old. I'm not getting money from anywhere. I didn't have like any concept of allowance growing up. So I had to figure out a way to get money so that I can be part of it. So at that point, I was already like shoplifting. But here's me using stealing as a tool to help me feel more part of everybody else.
So the first thing wasn't necessarily a substance; it was an action.
It was a behavior. Yeah.
Behavior. That's very interesting. Do you think that when people think back to their first time, people who not necessarily have an addiction to theft, maybe it's a different addiction, do you think that people with other addictions, maybe substance, maybe other areas, might go back to some place that early on in their life about something that's not necessarily part of the addiction they have now? Do you think people
Yeah.
think that far back?
100%.
Yeah, it's
That's
common.
a short answer. I could talk to you more about it, but 100%. It's from things like reading like books and getting lost in it. It's a You see, it's a means to get something.
Okay.
So for me, I'm doing these unhealthy behaviors in order to feel healthy, in order to feel normal, in order to be okay, right? Other types of behaviors, which is really to feel okay, is an escapism. So if I didn't do this, but I know others who have, let's say, read a novel and they just get lost in it, and to the extent where they'll stay up as a kid till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, there are consequences, right? So I'm going against the rules. There are consequences, but I need this in order to feel okay. So this is more like escaping, numbing a pain, right? But
Right.
there's a pain and we need to get rid of it. So either we're going to feel part of and we'll be okay, or we're going to escape the pain and not think about it and get lost somewhere else in imagination.
That's funny because it's a very interesting parallel you draw there, because last week when I was discussing with Shimmy about different areas of addiction, of what can constitute an addiction, I asked him, what about positive activities and positive actions that can be classified as an addiction? He responded that was something along the lines of, that's not really how it works. So I pointed out the idea of exercise. Somebody who just can't stop exercising. He's like, usually that is tied to something else. And you're bringing a parallel to reading, which normally we think of as a positive activity. We don't think of somebody that reads too much, but it's a good way to get the idea across to somebody who does not have necessarily an addiction to something that we consider a vice, that this is something that somehow it's not necessarily an addiction, but it is something that has the consequence that you might not think about while you're doing it.
Yeah, I think it's something that's really important for people to hear. We get so attached to the behavior, to the drug, to the alcohol, and we forget about the underlying issue. And if you want to know, let's say, how do I know I'm an addict? Because I know what happens when I try to stop. That's how I know I'm an addict. It's not about my using, it's about what happens in my head, in my heart, in my thoughts when I don't, when I
Right.
try to. And so let's say if a kid is like binge reading, right? It's okay to, and it's, if somebody's drinking, it's okay to drink. But what happens when you don't want to drink or you have consequences and you're trying to stop? What happens?
Right.
What all of a sudden starts coming up? And if things like the ones I said, like not feeling a part of, feeling restless, irritable, discontent all the time, anxious, if all these things are coming up, that means that there's something under there that's bubbling. And I've been suppressing or numbing,
Yeah.
escaping.
Yeah, I hear that. And it's good for people out there to hear that type of a thing. It really kind of isolates what the start of it might be. So we spoke about the start of it for you, which was theft. Now, how does that progress into substances?
I can't pinpoint the exact point, but the earliest memory that I remember using alcohol as something to help me do what I felt other people were doing easily was I was 12 years old and I had classmates already getting bar mitzvah, and people would just dance on the dance floor. And almost everybody that was in my class that I can remember would just go and they would just dance and they were happy and they would have fun, you know. I wanted to do that too. I was actually pretty athletic. I was able to like do. I would flip over people making headstands. Right, they would make a headstand, and I'd flip over them. So like, there was something there that like I would love to do. Here's my chance to shine, where everybody's standing around this, but I'm too scared. You
Right.
know, so I take everybody. Everybody's given a teeny tiny drop, and I collect all those drops and I take a drink. And then at a certain point, I start feeling okay and I go ahead and I do what I want. So I can't say, do I remember? I don't remember if I did it every single bar mitzvah, but that's something I remember pretty clearly. Using alcohol to help me feel confident enough, liquid courage, as they call it, to go and do what I was scared to do. So that's the earliest memory of using alcohol.
Right. I would imagine that's something that people can relate to. People do use alcohol not only for liquid courage, as you say, but things that could be along the lines of just to feel relaxed about a certain thing. And that could be a gateway type of a thing for somebody, especially as young as 11, 12, 13 years old. And that, I guess, over the course of the next couple of years, progressed into more harder substances.
Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't get into too much. I mean, I'll be very open. I smoked weed, and from the first time I started until I stopped, I basically smoked almost every single day for about a decade. And um, I did explore a little bit with Adderalls, where I mean, the first time I ever took Adderall, I didn't know that it was something crazy, but I snorted it, and I used that to be able to drink more. So it was Purim, and I was kind of dying out, and somebody introduced me to it. It didn't seem pretty harmful at all. It wasn't like the drugs that I've heard of growing up. It wasn't heroin. It wasn't cocaine, as far as I know. I knew, and I didn't know that I could just take it as a pill. I just took it and I snorted it, right? And I was able to drink the entire night to function. I remember being able to carry like 5 different conversations at the same time, and I felt like Superman. That was the extent of really my drug use. I mean, there was all the other drugs were all around me, but I just never felt the need to go there. And I could talk about another very important reason why I didn't feel like I can go there is because I had a fear of losing control. I didn't want to be in a state where I couldn't control myself.
Right. So I know that I watched your presentation online. You mentioned in that speech you spent the night in prison.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that. How did it escalate to the point where that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was being a hero, but basically, we were a bunch of friends in Israel doing. Whoever's done Israel knows what it means. Like you do a good year in Israel, and we had an incredible group of friends, which most of us are still very close. And we did a trip down to Eilat, and we were camping on the beach. So it's not such a big beach, but there was like a side beach, and we all, almost every single one of us, were drinking and smoking at the time. In addition to whatever else, some people were doing. And we had one of the tents pitched up during the day, and whoever wanted to get high would just go into the air, smoke, and then leave and continue about their day. So that was the purpose of that tent. It started getting dark, and it was Yud Aleph Nisan, which is a time where we wanted to have some sort of holy experience because it's the Rebbe's birthday, and most of us were Chabad. So we wanted to do something like that. So a couple of guys went to the store. They were going to get some alcohol and some munchies, and then we would do something holy. As far off as we were still very close, and
Right.
we cared about these things. So these guys went out, and I was in the tent preparing a lot of, as we call it, brew, right? We would take hash and we would mix it with cigarettes. And once it's prepared, so you don't have to spend time, we're going to just sit and have quality time, right? So we're going to have everything prepared so we don't have to stop in the middle to prepare more, right? So we're prepared, right? So I'm sitting there preparing it, and a bunch of cops show up, and there's a ton of hash everywhere. And I thought like this. I thought I was going to be a hero, which I guess I was to a certain extent. I said, it's all mine. Even though it's really everybody's and everybody had different amounts. I said, it's all mine. They're like, really? Yes, it's all mine. I had no idea what consequences I was getting myself into, but I was just, I guess, following my gut. And they locked me up. They asked me a bunch of questions. And then they put me into a cell. And when I'm in the cell, it's about 1:00 in the morning already, because they had me wait. I guess that's part of their thing. They make you wait until you speak to a person, then wait until you go into a cell. So finally got in there. I met the sweetest guy. He was detoxing from heroin. He was going a little cuckoo, but he was the sweetest man. His name was also Moshe, but they had connected our legs together, so we can't go anywhere. But then eventually, I had to crawl into bed. And what was bed? It was like these cemented bunk beds into the wall, literally just cement. No pillow, no blanket, no nothing. And I knew I had hit a low, because it wasn't just like I'm in prison. I'm in prison. This is a cement bed in the cell with the guy detoxing from heroin. And I know that because I asked him. He told me that. And I didn't have a pillow, so I take my shoes off. I put it into my shirt, and my shoes were kind of like soft, so that was my pillow. So there was something about that action that felt like, wow, this is a low.
Yeah.
I'm so tons and tons of self-pity. Oh my gosh, look where I am. And I was promising, I was talking to the Rebbe, I was talking to God. I'm saying, this is Yod Aleph Nisan. This is where I am. I promise I will never smoke again. I am done. This is as bad as it gets. And if you only just take me out of this one, bail me out of this one, and you have my true word. And I know with complete faith, not just faith, I know it's just a fact. I really, 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 really meant it. With every bone in my body, I meant it. And I believed it, that I would follow through.
Right.
And, under 12 hours later, I had already seen a judge, and he had already let me go with certain conditions. I couldn't leave the country, and I couldn't get caught again. Within those 12 hours, I was already getting high again.
So that's another thing that you mentioned a lot in your presentation, that there were a number of times when you say, I'm never going to do this again, I'm never going to do this again. And it took hours or days until you were doing it again.
Yeah.
So,
I think the painful thing about it and the sad thing about it is that along with every promise that I make and commitment comes real commitment. I'm investing my self-respect and my self-worth in my word, and I break it. Along with my sobriety is my self-esteem broken, my self-worth broken, my self-respect broken. And when I say these words, I mean each one of them individually, substantially. And the only way to deal with that pain of shame, guilt, and all that stuff, and self-loathing and self-pity is through getting high.
right.
There's no other thing on earth that can make me feel better. Right? So every time it just gets worse and worse.
Right.
And I think a big mistake I was making at the time is that I was thinking that the only problem is the drugs. The only problem, and this is without even looking at alcohol as the problem. I didn't even look at alcohol as an issue. I knew there was something wrong with it. I was drinking more than any normal person, and I knew I was using it in order to cope. But I didn't. That wasn't necessarily my problem. It's just crazy to me that I had absolutely no idea.
So let's talk about the turning point. What was the turning point? I know on your presentation you talked about a lot of times when you say, never again, it's not going to happen, not going to happen, never going to end. It's going to end now. What was the actual, in the end of the day, the time when you were able to say, it's never going to happen again, and you were right?
So what's interesting is that I had no idea. The last time I got high and drank, I had no idea that it was going to be the last time. The last night, as you can see in the video, that I drank, I was expressing suicide ideation, right? And I just wanted to die, and it actually seemed like a very smart idea, and I was expressing envy of the people who did die. And that night, I ended up in the psych ward, in a psychiatric ward. Um, Again, I had no idea that I was going to a psych ward. All I knew is I had to go to a place to get me help because the way I was running my life was not going to work. I really did not know that that was going to be the last time. I wanted to do whatever it takes so that I can figure out some sort of way to drink and use successfully. If only I go get help, eventually I'll start being able to just smoke on the weekends. Eventually, because this is something I've seen. I've seen a lot of my friends, they only smoke on the weekends, or like they'll only smoke on occasion. And or like, for example, I have certain family members, like they'll take some drinks and they're like, oh, I'm feeling it, I'm not going to drink anymore. Like, what? Are you serious? That makes no sense. If you have something good, take more. How are you going to maintain that? Anyway, ended up in the psych ward, and once I was there, I couldn't leave. They had locked me up, and it wasn't worth it for me to act out or be aggressive in any way, shape, or form, because that only comes to bite me, and I saw that in others. So I think the real turning point was the conversation I had with somebody who was also an addict, and that was the beginning. I did not know that I would never drink or smoke again. But that was the turning point where somebody else, I'm having a conversation with him, and I'm certain that he really knows how I feel. And I have no mistake about that. And I have no fear to share with him my pain. And he shares his pain with me. Tremendous, tremendous pain that he's been through. And I'm like, oh wow, if he's been through all that, I feel okay sharing my story. And he convinces me to go to rehab. I go straight from that psych ward to rehab. And when I go to rehab, all of a sudden I'm in a big environment. There's tons of addicts that understand me. And then it comes to a whole new level. There was the concept of, oh wow, their stories are so much more dramatic. My story is no big deal. I'm not even going to share it because I'm going to sound like a fool. I never did any hard drugs, and I wasn't in a gang. I didn't sell my body, but at a certain point, I finally shared it. And all of a sudden, all my thoughts were just proven wrong. And these people are embracing me and admiring me and encouraging me. So that's the biggest turning point, because I turned from hopeless to hopeful. That's really the key, and having that camaraderie with people I'm no longer isolated in my thoughts and my emotions. And thus begins the journey of recovery. And I think my willingness to do the whole program of recovery through therapy, outpatient, and all different other ways is that conviction that I had in the beginning that I'm going to get my answers here, and this is where I'm going to find it.
So before we get into the recovery on the upward swing, I want to point out or go over some things that came up during your whole story just now that I want to highlight a little bit of. So when a lot of, especially in the Frum community, we think about people that are addicts, they start by thinking about somebody that kind of threw everything away. It doesn't sound to me like you ever threw religion away. From your video online, I've seen you had a family at this time. You were married, you still are, kids. It doesn't sound to me like it's the regular generic story of somebody who is an addict. It sounds like it's somebody that there's a hidden addiction that if you don't really know the person, you might not know that there's a problem there. Is that pretty much accurate? Or
there is some things I want to comment on, if that's
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to start actually from the end because it's just on the tip of my tongue. It's that when I came back, my best friends looked at me and said, Moishe, I had no idea what you were going through. You? Out of all people? That makes no sense. I thought I knew you. So it's important. My friends didn't really know all these things. These type of conversations, these types of podcasts, these speaker events, they weren't not happening. And it's not so long ago, So yes, it could be happening, and you don't know about it unless you get educated on what the signs are. And sometimes you could even know the signs, but they're hiding it from you, which addicts are very good at that because they have to in order to survive. If they let you know the pain that they're in, they're not going to be able to continue doing the only thing that they know is going to keep them alive.
In my mind, that is something that's very important for people to hear because it's not always about the things that we were talking about. There wasn't the religious pressure that some people might feel, and you were still able to maintain a public persona, a public life that I guess now I'm learning even your closest friends didn't know about. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing going on behind the scenes.
I mean, a lot of effort goes into making sure that nobody sees what's going on.
Right. So now let's talk about the recovery aspect of it. You want to tell us a little bit about any interventions that might have happened, whether it be therapy, rehab, support groups, any of those types of things that you want to talk about?
I'll tell you, I mean, I say this, I'm not 100% sure about it, but I don't know many people who have such a support system that I have. I'm so fortunate, and I'm so grateful. If there's anybody that's listening to this that's part of my support system, I'm so grateful to them. I see myself as a product of two things: my willingness to ask for help and my support system. Without those two things, I'm dead. I'm absolutely dead. And support system started with mainly the feeling of not being alone, being with other addicts. Being with other addicts who have experienced the emotional journey and the emotional story that I have was one of the biggest things, taking my story and my life out of isolation. The second thing is education, understanding that I'm not a bad person. I'm just sick and I have a mental illness. And addiction is a mental illness. Addiction is a behavior that is a medicine for a mental illness. Okay? And then coming out of rehab, where I also did a lot of therapy, a lot of addressing things like resentments and shame and guilt, at least the beginning of that journey. Coming out of rehab, the car from the rehab literally dropped me straight off at the intensive outpatient, where I went to therapy 3 times a week. There was a relapse prevention group in the beginning, and then there was a process group, which means relapse prevention is like you're mostly just trying to talk about, there are a lot of people relapsing in this group. Let's talk about it. What can we do to make sure that we don't relapse? What plans can we put in place? What support? If somebody relapsed, okay, what happened? How did it happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Then there's a process group where we're reintegrating into life. I was in a bubble for 30 days, which, by the way, most of the time people are not there for 30 days. It's much longer. But I'm, again, so grateful that God decided to make my story only 30 days, which, if I had the option, I'd go back because it was so beneficial, but only for good reasons. In outpatient, so this process group where I'm reintegrating into life, and I'm coming back from this haven, and I'm expecting the whole world to just do what I want, for mainly specifically at home. I'm sober now. Now listen to me. But there was it's a pretty heavy duty process coming back sober, because all of a sudden, my wife has been going through years of needing to compensate for my not being present. And all of a sudden I'm back. And not only am I back and I'm being present, I also feel entitled to have an opinion on how things should be run at home. So there's a lot of work in that, in process group, in couples therapy, in-person individual therapy. Yeah, so that was the beginning. Also being part of support groups of other recovering addicts locally, where we get together a couple of times a week and we process things.
So you've now been clean for a while.
Yeah.
How long has it been?
In a couple of months is going to be 7 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So over the last 7 years, nothing, no drinking, no substances at all.
No.
That's amazing. So congratulations on that. That's.
We could throw in, I quit smoking also. It's been over 3 years. Thank God.
Wow.
Cigarettes. Yeah.
So really nothing that's that harmful for your body that you've done before. Maybe sugar every once in a while.
Definitely. I've gained over 40 pounds since I got sober.
Wow.
I'm not overweight. I was just extremely underweight.
I was just going to say that. I'm looking at you right now, and you don't look like you're overweight. So I can imagine how underweight you were beforehand. So what do you do now? Now that you're clean, I'm assuming you're back in the workforce. So what is it that you do? Do you use this as an experience?
Yeah. So I just want to point out one thing. Like, my daily thing that I do, my daily routine or my support that I get today is not as intense as it was in the beginning. In the beginning, I had to be in a bubble in rehab. In the beginning, before that, I had to be locked up. I had to be, because if I wasn't locked up, I would have gone out, and if I had the option, I'd for sure gone out and drink and use again. So I had to be locked up. Then I had to be in rehab. I had to be in that bubble, that safe place. And then also in the beginning, when I came back, I was actually working for family. But one of the first things I did, I sat down with a family member he was like my manager at the time at work. And I said, look, I need to go to this. I go to therapy. I basically gave him my whole schedule of what I need to do in order to stay sober. And I said, if you're okay with this, then I'll continue working with you. If you're not okay with this, I need to find somewhere else that's going to allow me to do this, because this is the most important thing in life. And it was very intense. I was spending at least, probably 10 to 15 hours a week just on that type of work. And then over time, I was able to let go a little bit. And today what it is there are certain elements that I have to have every single day. And sometimes I do it, sometimes I slack off, but as long as I have a few of these, I'll be okay. Number one is I have to have an ongoing relationship with God. So if you were to ask me, what did you do right before this podcast, and you closed your eyes and you were thinking, what I was doing is I was reaffirming my relationship with Hashem and saying, I cannot do this. I am not somebody who speaks on podcasts, especially since this is my first time ever doing it. But God, you know how to do it, and you know what message it is that you need to deliver through me. So I'm asking you, please help me forget about myself, my ego, or anything like that, and let me be a vessel to, give me the merit of being a vessel of your message. So having that type of relationship with Hashem. I have to have that type of relationship because I cannot stay sober. But with help of Hashem and help of things outside of myself, then I can. So relationship with Hashem, being of service to others. If I'm not of service to others, if I don't do things for others, I lose my sense of worth. A lot of my sense of purpose and self-esteem is attached to the service I do for others. So it's very often where I'll do something for somebody, or somebody will be opening up to me and asking me for help, and I'll be telling them, look, I don't think you realize, but you're doing for me way more, I think, than what I'm doing for you. And they just won't get it. And I understand that's okay that they don't get it. But the fact is that I need to help others. Okay? And here's just a little example. I could be at a family function or like a simcha of sorts, and I feel like I want to drink. One of the things I use as a tool is I'll be of service. I'll help in the kitchen. I'll clean up some tables. I'll do something of service, or I'll try to make somebody's day and ask them how they're doing. And automatically that need to drink goes away. So being of service, connecting to God, spending time in gratitude, whether it means most of the time, what it means is that I sit down and I make a list of things that I'm grateful for. Also, a big thing is that I try to eat breakfast. Being hungry, ever heard the HALT thing? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired?
Yeah.
Those are usually the four things, very commonly are the things that are causing me to feel agitated or anxious or angry. So I like to try to eat as early as possible, so like that I can take that off the list, you know. So that's my daily thing, and I still go to therapy. I mean, there was a long period of a good couple of years that I wasn't going to therapy, and life was okay. I still had my support groups. I was still processing things. I was still growing, but at a certain point, anxiety just kicked in, and I was just paralyzed with anxiousness, and my marriage was getting shaky, and I had so many things that were bothering me, and I just needed to get help. So I shopped around for a couple of therapists until somebody reminded me how much I loved my therapist from my outpatient. I'm like, oh my gosh, I could contact him. And as soon as I contacted him, thank God, like we've just hit it off, and been seeing him. And he does a lot of inner child work, a lot of deep therapy, which helps me deal with all those things that are still coming up. There's still so much to grow.
And now I know that you mentioned in the beginning when you introduced yourself, you are a life coach.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? Did your experience of having people help you in your recovery propel you into becoming a life coach on your own?
I'll tell you really what gave birth to this concept, which I had absolutely zero confidence of being, as far as I can remember. It was born from having real heavy conversations with people, including counselors and rehab and therapists and other people in recovery, being in an environment with other people who have these type of deep conversations. And it kept coming up like, Moishe, are you a therapist? Or like, did you ever consider becoming a therapist? And it happened enough that at a certain point, I'm like, you know what, maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. There was a certain point where like I had a choice of I had lost the job, so I had an opportunity to start thinking about, okay, what do I want? And I started looking into it, and very quickly I just fell in love. And I just wasn't ready to do. I would love to be a licensed therapist. I really would. I would love to become an addiction counselor or something like that. I guess I'm just not ready to do all that. So I did the training for life coaching, and I had a lot of experience working with people one-on-one, and I got certified with the International Coaching Federation, and that's how I got certified. And every time I do a coaching, I just love it. I really feel like that's what I'm meant to be doing right now.
Okay, and can you tell me a little bit about the Neshama organization?
Yeah, I was just minding my own business, and one day I get a phone call from, I think it was Moishe Chanin. He's the founder and director of Aliyah. That's a local Crown Heights organization, which it started off as like a clubhouse for like teens who needed a place to go. I was actually one of the people that used to go there like way back when, like way in the beginning. Anyway, so he reached out to me and he said, "Look, I'm part of a group of people. We get together every Tuesday and we try to brainstorm and come up with ideas of how to improve things in our community. And this is as a response to some people dying in our community as a result of drug overdose." So I said, "Sure, opportunity to be of service, right?" So I show up to these meetings and it's like, wow, I really feel like I'm needed here. This is a group of people who really cared, but I'm actually somebody who's been there and they value my opinion. And we started coming up with ideas, and I've been involved since. A lot of taking phone calls, just people know that I'm part of them, and also they've seen my video, so they'll call me. But we're ongoing. I mean, the Shamas is doing some great things. I love the mission, which is in one word, really prevention. And if it's two words, it's prevention through education. And there are many ways to educate.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, not necessarily about your story or about your work, but I'm also interested to know about Orthodox Judaism as a whole. So where might you see the most areas in Orthodox life with opportunities for improvement, whether it be in your community, whether it be in the Frum community on a grander scale?
Right. So along with the Neshamas mission, it's education. And the question is like, where do you start? And okay, somebody's listening to this and said, I care, I want to do something. Alongside the concept of building resilience in our children that Shimon Russell talks about, which means in life we're going to be faced with adversity. Are we going to have the strength to bounce back? That's resilience. So how do we build the resilience? I mean, he talks about it. I highly recommend somebody look it up. It's one of those things that Neshamas did. They had brought him down from Israel so that he can give a talk to the local community. And this was one of the speeches. So I encourage people to look that up. Shimon Russell at Neshamas. And I'm thinking about this because there's so many important things, but I think once I talk about it, we may see that they're all really one. One of the biggest things that goes along with mental illness in general is the shame, being alone. I'm being alone because I'm ashamed about it, so I can't tell anybody. And it's not just the person who has the mental illness, it's also somebody who is living with the person with mental illness. I can't tell anybody that my husband is an addict. I can't tell anybody, because there's shame there and fear. Fear that shidduchim, I don't know, there's so many different fears that people can have. So yeah, things like this, taking away the stigma. I know it sounds so cliche, but yeah, talking about it, getting educated about it. That's so important. We have to, to do that. Now, resilience, education, creating a space. There has to be a space. Okay, so basically you want to plant some sort of fruit, right? Or some sort of vegetable.
Okay.
In order to do that, you have to have the right soil, you have to have the right environment, you have to have rain, you have to have water. There's a bunch of different things. Some things are in our control and some things are not. If God doesn't make it rain, or even if it rains and we water it ourselves, if God doesn't make it grow, it's not going to grow. Right? So there's a bunch of these different elements that are within our control, and there's some things that are not. But what our job is to create an environment and to plant the seed and then let go and not try to further control and manipulate and that type of thing, So this can be applicable in so many different areas. So if it's a marriage, right, and the wife or the husband knows that the wife is doing something that's damaging, if we try to tell them, hey, you better stop, or stop, you're killing you're killing yourself, you want the kids to be without a father, the environment that's going to support and give the person the opportunity to do their part. Let them know, parents, let your kids know, hey, I see that you're going through something, that's a whole subject on its own, like not seeing the behavior on its own, knowing that the only way a kid would ever do something like this is if there's something behind it that's making them do it. So knowing that there's something behind it that's making them do it and saying, hey, maybe today you're not ready to tell me what's going on, but I want you to know this is a safe place. Create a safe place for them. When they're ready, they'll ask you for help. You can't force them to ask you for help. You can't force them to admit that they're an addict. You can't force them to get help. But what you could do is create the right environment. And the way you create that environment is by expressing that level of acceptance, no matter what. And it's very challenging. And if somebody doesn't have the capacity to create that environment, there's support out there. There are therapists that can help you. You don't have to do that by yourself. And just like the addict can't stay sober by themselves, it's probably also very difficult or impossible for the person to support the addict by themselves. Because all of us humans, for the most part, have a need to feel secure. And usually the feeling of security is coming from some sort of control, some sort of certainty. And where do I get it from? Control, right? I'm getting very philosophical here, but it's at the root of it all. So if we understand what's at the root of it all, I think it will dictate our behavior, right? So if I realize, oh my gosh, I am manipulating the situation because I am trying to control this person. If I only knew that by me enforcing my control is only going to be a trigger for them to want to go out and use, maybe I won't do that. And if I don't feel ready or strong enough to control myself from acting in ways that triggers my loved one, then I need support. I need other people who were successful at creating that environment and successfully had their loved one eventually get help, right? So education, creating that environment, I think these are real keys that we need, and slowly we're making it happen.
I think you're right, and I hope that this podcast and others like it really help to further that type of a message. Your story is extremely inspiring to a lot of people, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Where can people reach you if they want to talk to you?
Okay, so there's a few ways. I'm pretty open and for the most part communicative, but I am on social media. I'm on Facebook and I'm on LinkedIn and on Instagram. On Facebook, you just type in my name, Moishe, Moishe Chanin. That's on Facebook, and also on LinkedIn, as well as in Instagram, I go under Coach Moishe, Moishe. I could be reached there. You can also reach me on my email address, which is just my first name, Moishe, Moishe, at chewablegoals.com. Yeah, chewable, CHEWABLEGOALS. The idea is we don't want to bite more than we can chew, so we want to find chewable goals. That's basically a big foundation of my coaching.
All right. Moishe, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I wish we had more time to talk, and maybe one time we could continue this conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you so much. It's really an honor.
My thanks to Moishe Chanin, Shimi Feintuch, and the fine people at Amudim, especially David Weingarten, for sharing their thoughts, stories, and statistics on this important topic. Moishe mentioned where he can be found, but as a reminder from last week, Shimi Feintuch's website is shimifeintuch.com, SHIMMYFEINTUCH. He's also on a variety of social media platforms. Amudim's website is amudim.org, AMUDIM. For now, have a good week. Kol Tov.
The Jewish Living Podcast is produced by Sroli Paikus. Our theme song is The Band by A.B. Rottenberg from Journeys 4. You can email the show at jewishlivingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Jewish_living. The Jewish Living Podcast is recorded in conjunction with the Queen's Jewish Link.